headlines. The South Korean government says it's planning to boost efforts to prepare for unification and seek dialogue with North Korea in its policy briefing to the president. The South Korean military, meanwhile, vows to use more advanced technology to enhance its defense posture as part of its creative national defense against North Korea. And we get you a pulse check on Korea's startup fever in the first installment of our special week-long series. Hello and welcome to Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I am Kang Tae-ri. Government bodies under the Foreign Affairs umbrella here in South Korea presented their 2015 blueprint to the president today. Topping their agenda was paving the way for interkorean unification. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
In the 70th year after the division of the Korean Peninsula, the Unification Ministry wants to launch a new era of reunification. Various events with North Korea are part of the plan, including a test run of a railway across the interkorean border around Liberation Day in August. The train will take off from Seoul and make stops at the North Korean border town of Kaesong and the capital Pyongyang before its final stop at Sinuiju. Sound unrealistic? Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae says the ministry has all the data it needs.
There will need to be discussions between South and North Korea on the issue, but once North Korea agrees, I think the project won't be hard to carry out.
In its talks with the North, South Korea is seeking fundamental solutions to humanitarian issues like reunions for war-separated families. It's also willing to discuss more aid to Pyongyang. The idea includes the construction of multiple farm complexes in North Korea and training for its workers.
We are planning to extend development assistance to North Korea to help it build the groundwork for autogenic capability.
To ensure these reunification efforts will continue past the current administration, the government plans to introduce new legislation. This includes training personnel to prepare for reunification and designating officials at each government ministry. But most of these plans need the cooperation of North Korea, which is still sitting on South Korea's month-old offer for talks. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea plans to continue its push to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula while improving relations with Japan. Our Connie Kim tells us more.
Denuclearizing North Korea and mending bilateral ties with Japan are the main goals for South Korea's Foreign Affairs Ministry this year. The government said it will create a system in which inter-Korean talks and denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula can work hand in hand. This will be driven by a so-called Korean formula that aims to revive the six-party nuclear talks stalled since 2008. The formula consists of preconditions and ways for restarting the multilateral talks based on agreements reached by participating nations.
Nuclear talks were held excluding North Korea. South Korea held frequent bilateral talks with the US, Japan, and Russia. There were also trilateral talks held between South Korea, the US, and Japan.
But before bringing North Korea back to the negotiating table, South Korea will need to resolve its issues with Japan over Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. South Korea wants Japan to properly compensate the victims of sexual enslavement, while Japan claims the issue was resolved through a 1965 bilateral treaty. And marking the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties this year, South Korea and Japan hope to see bilateral ties improve. Foreign Affairs Minister Yoon Byung-se said high-level talks between the two nations will work towards laying a cornerstone for future relations.
The high-level talks that are being held today in Tokyo is part of the government's efforts to lay foundation for a summit talk between the two nations. Seeing a change in Japan's position will be a contribution for improving ties.
Resolving the issue was a precondition for the first summit between President Park Geun-hye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The South Korean military says it will use more advanced technology and its equipment to enhance its defense posture. This is just part of its plan for mounting a creative national defense against North Korea. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Korea's defense ministry has laid out its plans for the year, with a focus on building a creative national defense. As part of the plan, the ministry plans to employ advanced technology to enhance its military capabilities and gain an edge over North Korea. The list of high-tech weaponry includes unmanned surface vehicles that will be capable of conducting offshore missions without jeopardizing the lives of military personnel. There are also plans to use robotics to boost surveillance capabilities on the front lines and equip soldiers with state-of-the-art gear. The ministry is seeking ways to better deal with Pyongyang's nuclear weapons development programs and to better fight North Korean troops, which outnumber the South roughly 2-1. Meanwhile, the ministry reiterated that it will proceed with a large-scale military exercise with the U.S. in March, despite the North's offer to suspend nuclear tests if the Allies halt the drill. The North sees the exercise as a rehearsal for war, while Korea and the U.S. say it is defensive in nature. During this year's drill, the two allies plan to strengthen their joint defense posture and set up a comprehensive plan to counter the communist regime's chemical and biological weaponry. The ministry said that maintaining a strong military posture of readiness guarantees a strong foundation for national defense and sets up a basis for a peaceful unification. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea says there will be no family reunions unless South Korea removes its sanctions on the North. This refers to the sanctions that followed North Korea's torpedo attack on a South Korean warship back in 2010. Pyongyang, via its propaganda website, also criticized Seoul for its joint military exercises with Washington, and anti-Pyongyang leaflets floated across the border. There have been challenges and uncertainties for South Korean firms operating in the interkorean industrial complex in Kaesong over the years, but data is showing that their business has actually been doing quite well. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
Listed South Korean firms with operations at the Kaesong industrial complex have been faring well despite inter-Korean relations blowing hot and cold over the years. According to the Corporate Association of the Kaesong Industrial Complex, the company's average sales rose nearly 120% between 2005 and 2013. Their operating profits also jumped more than 140% over the same period. This translates into a compound annual growth rate of about 10% in terms of sales and 12% in operating profit. South Korean firms entered the Kaesong Industrial Complex in 2004, and full operations began in December that year when it started production. The firms tend to suffer when tensions are high on the Korean Peninsula, and they were hit the hardest in 2013 when North Korea unilaterally shut down the complex for 5 months. However, despite such drawbacks, experts say cheap labor is an advantage that boosts the firm's competitiveness. And with half of the list of firms in the complex also logging double-digit growth rates in net profits, their performances stand out from the rest of the South Korean corporate sector. Recent data shows Korean companies reported an average of $5.5 of net profits on every $100 of sales last year. That's below the global average of $7.9. Korean firms' profitability also fell by nearly 3 percentage points in the past 3 years, the second worst corporate showing among 25 major economies. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The woman behind the so-called nut rage incident on a Korean Air flight has denied charges that she's obstructed aviation safety. Cho Hyuna, the former Korean Air vice president, had no comments for the court on the first day of her trial on this Monday. She faces a slew of charges, including assault on a plane and obstructing a government investigation. Her lawyer spent much of the hearing pleading not guilty to most charges, saying they are not true or have been exaggerated. If convicted, Cho can face up to 10 years in jail. The high-profile case revolves around Cho's actions on a flight from New York City to Seoul last December, during which she allegedly became enraged over her in-flight service, resulting in the deplaning of a senior purser before takeoff. Korea's mobile advertising market is expected to top $925 million this year. This means it will account for 1/3 of Korea's total online advertising market. According to a report by local media firm DMC Media, the mobile advertising market will grow 27% compared to last year due to the growing number of smartphone users in the country. The report also reveals that more mobile advertisements will be in the form of animation, videos, and even real-time bidding this year. In addition, Korea's online advertising market is expected to grow 9% this year, topping $2.8 billion. The future is looking brighter for startups here in Korea, and some even believe that Korea is set to become Asia's Silicon Valley in the coming years. The Korean government is certainly dishing out tens of billions of dollars in grants and other subsidies in hopes of fostering these startups. So now let's get started with the first in our 5-part series on startups in Korea this week. Here is our Hwang Sung-hee.
Over the past 35 years, only 3 startups have made it to the top 100 companies in terms of market capitalization in Korea. The fact highlights that conglomerates still dominate the Korean economy. But there are signs the corporate landscape is changing. The number of startups in Korea has been breaking records in recent years, reaching nearly 30,000 last year. That's more than triple the number seen during the dot-com bubble from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. The number of serious investors has grown too. Almost $1.3 billion was poured into startups last year, marking a 27% rise from 3 years ago. The startup ecosystem has also strengthened with a rise in angel investors, accelerators, and networks. Startup Alliance, a joint effort between the government and private sector, for example, arranges special events to connect startups with potential partners and clients.
Compared to Canada, where I'm from, Korean government, a lot of Korean institutions providing a really good environment to the people who are preparing to start a business. For example, this kind of a meeting and providing really good information, and there are a lot of seminars.
Experts say the new startup wave is different from the previous boom when e-commerce was still a fledgling business and internet connections were clunky. Now, net access is instant and easy, and more importantly, mobile.
A lot of small startups, they're trying to connect some kind of services to the smartphone and more efficiently than existing offline businesses. So there will be a lot of new innovations on that front.
President Park Geun-hye wants startups to lead her administration's drive to transform Korea into a creative economy. She has vowed to cut through red tape and provide financial incentives to them. In line with this, the government has earmarked $92 billion this year to support small and mid-sized businesses, including startups. Getting off the ground is one thing, but turning startups into profitable businesses is another. Korea's #1 web portal Naver, one of the most successful startups that survived the dot-com crash, is also providing practical help. It's opening a startup accelerator this year in Seoul's version of Silicon Valley, the Tehran Valley. That area will also house a government-led tech startup campus and the 3rd Google campus in the world.
The success of startups is key to realizing the government's creative economy plan, which in turn is key to getting the economy back on its feet. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
A young Korean man who went missing in Turkey might have joined the Islamic State in Syria. Authorities here in Korea say they have found pictures of Islamic State-related material on this teen's computer. Nothing has been confirmed yet, though, and Korea and Turkey are trying to find out where he might be. Son Jung-in has more.
Seoul's foreign ministry says the 18-year-old man surnamed Kim was last seen on January 10th after leaving a hotel in Kilis, a town that straddles the Turkey-Syria border. His disappearance came to light 2 days later when Kim's travel companion, a Korean national in his 40s, reported him missing to the Korean embassy in Ankara. A Turkish daily newspaper reported on Saturday that Kim had crossed the border into Syria to join the Islamic State militant group after exchanging emails with one of its members. Authorities in Seoul initially cast doubt on the allegations, saying they had found no substantive evidence he was in contact with IS. However, new clues have come to light. Police in Korea say they found some photos on the teenager's computer showing IS members holding rifles and the group's distinctive black flag. And an employee of the hotel where Kim was staying in Kilis reportedly said he was wearing an Islamic-style headscarf and was carrying a full backpack as he left the hotel. The hotel employee said he thought Kim might have been planning on going to Syria, explaining that the area is a common route that foreign fighters take to join the terror group. Authorities in Korea and Turkey are working in close coordination to try and locate the teenager. If confirmed, it would mark the first known case of a Korean national joining Islamic State. 손정인, Arirang News.
Now, we have reports coming in that authorities in Korea have found evidence that this missing teen spoke to somebody in Turkey a number of times through a social networking service called SureSpot. Now, this is a mobile messaging application that uses exceptional end-to-end encryption for every text, image, and voice message, and this means higher level of security there. We will try to bring more updates on this story as they come out. Authorities in the United States are investigating reports of gunshots fired near the home of Vice President Joe Biden. And to tell us more, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, this is quite an alarming incident, and thankfully there were no injuries. Has there been any potential leads on who or why this apparent attack was carried out?
Well, police in Delaware are working together with the U.S. Secret Service to assess the situation right now. They're searching the residence for any damage or if the bullets hit any of the nearby houses. It's also been confirmed that the vice president and his wife were not present during the shooting, according to Biden's office. The Secret Service said several rounds were fired around 8:30 Saturday evening local time on a public road several hundred meters from the secured perimeter of the Delaware residence. Soon after hearing the shots, Secret Service personnel saw a vehicle fleeing the scene at high speed. Police did arrest one person half an hour later when he tried to pass an officer who was securing the area. It's still not yet known whether the individual is tied to the shooting.
And let's shift to West Africa now. The government of Mali has declared the country Ebola-free after fighting off a second wave of infections last month. So how did Mali manage or succeed in wiping out this disease, whereas other neighboring countries are still struggling?
While addressing the nation's Mali Health Minister Ousmane Koni said it was the concerted efforts of local health workers and international partners that helped stop the spread of the virus. To drive that point home, health officials there have been closely monitoring over 300 Ebola cases at one point. The government officially declared the country free of the disease on Sunday, counting 6 Ebola-related deaths since the initial outbreak last year. Mali's last infected patient was released from hospital early last month.
After 42 days of monitoring with no confirmed Ebola cases and in accordance with the International Sanitary Directive, I declare today to be the end of the Ebola epidemic in Mali. From now on, travelers and goods will no longer be subject to special treatment abroad.
Mali became the 6th West African country to report cases of Ebola after a 2-year-old girl from Guinea died in October. According to the World Health Organization, Ebola has killed more than 8,400 people in the region.
Certainly a great lead to work with, and hopefully other neighboring countries can follow suit. Now, taking a brief look at the global economy and maybe pay some attention to this topic of wealth inequality. A fresh report by the charity group Oxfam expects the wealthiest 1% will soon own more than the rest of the world's population. This comes just days before the World Economic Forum in the Swiss city of Davos. What kind of message is Oxfam trying to send with this report?
Well, the timing of the release, as you pointed out, is far from any coincidence. This organization, which tackles global poverty, is seeking to put pressure on this elite group who will be meeting in Davos on Wednesday. And they're doing this to demand urgent action to tackle this dramatically growing divide between the rich and the poor. According to Oxfam research, current trends show that the richest 1% will surpass more than 50% of the world's wealth by 2016. On Monday, the director of Oxfam, Winnie Bayan-Yima, described the scale of this global inequality as staggering. The World Economic Forum in Davos is slated to run through January 24th and is expected to attract top political and business leaders from around the world.
Certainly hoping that this will be addressed there. And finally, Paul, Pope Francis is heading back to Rome after wrapping up his week-long tour of Asia. His last stop was in the Philippines, where he drew in millions of people with his message of hope and compassion, of course, for the poor. Tell us more about his historic send-off.
Well, hundreds of thousands of Filipinos came out to get a final glimpse of the 78-year-old pontiff before he took off from Manila Air Base under clear blue skies. Many lined the streets of the capital on this Monday, shouting, "We love you, Francis," and "Viva Santa Papa." There were many highlights during the last leg of his trip, including a mass that was held at Tacloban Airport over the weekend. Church leaders say it was a priority for Pope Francis to visit Tacloban City, which was wiped out by a typhoon in 2013, killing more than 6,000 people.
I really think this man is a saint. He really is a saint. And not only is he a saint, he brings a lot of hope in a time of sadness and despair in the world. And that's really something valuable, something that money can't buy. And that's why I think it's really important that I came here. Came here with my friends and my family.
On Sunday, a milestone was marked in Asia's largest Catholic nation when a record number of people gathered in Rizal Park despite strong winds and rain. The open-air mass was attended by an unprecedented 6 to 7 million people, according to the Vatican, the most since Pope John Paul II drew 5 million in Manila 20 years ago. Charity?
Certainly drew in a lot of people there. Another chance for us to see actually how his messages can come even without the form of a formality, just like we saw in Korea during his first Asia trip. Let's leave it there for now. Paul, thank you so much, and we'll see you again in just about 2 hours.
Hope your week is off to a great start. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the weather updates. Let's begin with some good news that fine dust index have finally dropped to average levels, but strong cold winds are making things feel a bit chillier than the actual numbers. Tomorrow is Taehan here in Korea, which is one of the seasonal indicators marking the coldest day of the season, but it looks like numbers will remain above seasonal average norms, so no worries of a cold snap. Looking ahead, it looks like warm winter conditions will continue for a while with chances of nationwide snow or showers on Wednesday and Thursday. Moving on to Tuesday's readings, Seoul will mix it 2, 4, Daegu and Gwangju 8, Busan hits 10. On to other regions, Jeju reaches 8, Dokdo 6, Mount Kumgang -2. Those are the updates we're following on this Monday evening. Let's take a look at the international weather.
And that will do it for this edition of Arirang News at 8. Have a great evening, and I will see you back here in about 9 minutes' time for Primetime News. See you then.